When emergency providers respond to calls, they never know what will be waiting for them when they arrive on scene. Vehicle accidents are notorious for having little to no information when units are first dispatched and then escalating quickly while units are en route. Resource needs for these types of incidents can be as simple as a rescue for medical care or complex as having a heavy rescue and hazmat response. Whatever the resource needs are for the call will be determined by the incident commander or IC, and it will be their job to continually monitor and manage it until after action report is done. The IC will need to set up a command post or command presence on the call so that all sorts of information can flow through them and they can constantly stay up to date with what is happening with their assignments that are made and to their crews accomplishing those tasks. This presentation will go over the IC role for accidents specifically, but it can be expanded to different large scenes such as fuel spills, alarms, and even certain fires. The first role of the IC is to first establish command so that there can be an IC. This shall be done by the first unit or officer that arrives on scene when there are 3 or more fire department units responding to a call. Whomever established command will be the IC for the duration of the incident unless they pass command to another person on scene or another unit once they arrive. This can be done over the radio to a person on scene or unit responding, as well as face-to-face with any person on scene. Whoever the IC is for the call, command is in charge of ordering resources and managing resources that are responding. Since we are addressing vehicle accidents primarily, we will focus more on the EMS side of what the IC will be expected to do. The fire side would deal more with if there was extrication that was needed and getting the appropriate resources responding, such as a heavy rescue team for complex extrication needs or hazmat response for any large spill over 25 gallons. Other resource considerations would be additional suppression units if there was a fire or law enforcement for traffic control. So the EMS side is far more complex in these types of calls, as the resources the IC needs can far outnumber that of what would be needed if there were no patients. How many units are needed for transport? Do I need an air or is a ground ambulance enough? Do I need a heavy rescue team? Do I need to make additional branches based on how many patients there are? Many of these questions will be answered for the IC based on the number of patients that are on the call. Determining how critical the patients are can assist what type of transport may be required, but the number of patients will determine how many units will actually be needed. A single patient motor vehicle accident, or MVA, can be much more simple for the IC to manage. Our response model will have at least one rescue responding to any traffic accident, and if it's severe enough, a rescue in a squad. The IC can focus on managing those resources to fulfill any immediate needs, and if they determine there are other needs, they can add more units to help. Needs could be more EMS providers, more extrication equipment, more suppression-capable units, or simple as just more manpower. They can focus on using all of their resources and providing care for a single patient and managing the scene. If there are multiple patients, the IC will have a lot more things to consider. Whether single or multiple patients, the IC will depend on a triage being completed by responders on scene and reporting that to them. This number will ultimately determine what the IC will do to manage the call and what additional resources will be needed or be needed to be added later on in the call. It bears repeating that a completed triage is the determining factor in the first steps the IC will take to manage the call. EMS responders will need to know and will need to be thorough, but be expedient on the completion of a triage and reporting back to the IC. The triage has been completed. As the IC, you now have the information you need to start making decisions. But what do you address first? On the back of our Southern Nevada Fire Operations, or SNFO worksheets, you'll find this sheet on the screen. This will help build the structure of a call with multiple patients and other information the IC can consider. The first thing the IC needs to determine when there are a given number of patients is the level of IMC they're faced with. This information will help classify the type of emergency and help set up the types of resources that must be ordered. Remember, the definition of an MCI is when the number of patients outnumber the total providers on scene, which may mean that 3 patients could still classify as an MCI, but not meet the criteria to declare it as such. The IC can still use this sheet to help manage the resources they do have and again provide a framework to build from. One important thing to note, dispatch does not currently add additional units when an MCI of any level is declared. The IC must be aware of this and add the units they need. Some examples are a medical alarm from town, which is 3 engines, 2 rescues, 1 truck, 2 battalion chiefs, and an EMS captain. They could also order a strike team of any unit, such as rescues, ambulances, engines, etc. This means you'll be receiving 5 units of whatever strike team is ordered. So, for example, strike team of ambulances is 5 ambulances, strike team of rescues is 5 rescues, strike team of 5 engines is 5 engines, and so on. One other thing to consider is how many providers each patient will need. Any patient that is classified as critical or red will most likely need 2 paramedics to provide treatment. This is important to know because if the crews that the IC has on scene are enough to manage the incident, but are also paramedics, those medics may be taken to provide care and then will leave the IC short-staffed on scene to manage any further incidents. It would be wise to think of having 2 ambulances for each 1 red patient so crews on scene will not be depleted. So besides ordering more transports, be it ground or air, there are several other assignments that will need to be made. Depending on how many patients there are, the IC can make 1 or several groups to manage the incident. On smaller incidents, or if resources are limited, the IC could consider making a medical or med group to one of the first arriving units. The units assigned to med group would then be responsible for handling and completing a triage and then reporting it, providing or delegating treatment of patients, and determining the appropriate method and destination of transport for patients and communicating that to the IC. Any communication will go through the med group supervisor directly to the IC so that not every person is attempting to get on the radio. If the incident becomes too large to handle for the med group alone, the IC can change the assignment to an EMS or medical branch that would manage different groups instead of different tasks, such as triage, treatment, and transport. Each group would then have its own supervisor that would be in charge of reporting all information to the EMS branch supervisor, who would then take over operations for the incident as applies to assignments given by the IC. The IC would remain in charge, but would direct their priorities on ordering and manage other resources. As the incident continues to evolve, other tasks would be assigned by the IC to other units arriving. Branches, which are the largest organization of people, would be formed if the incident was large enough scale to manage several groups or divisions. So divisions can be a geographical specific assignment, such as East Division, West Division, or Charlie Division and Bravo Division, or they can be made in place of a branch if applicable, and groups are task or tactic specific, such as extrication group, transport, treatment, or triage group. So each part of the ICS structure plays a role in management of the incident and overall outcome. Understanding the role of the IC is imperative so that all responders know not only who is in charge, but what to expect on scene. Taking that understanding a step further, we get into the details of which each of the main assignments are on a large-scale incident or MCI. So one of the assignments the IC can make can be medical group, and that can be assigned to a unit or units when they arrive on scene if the incident requires some management, but on a smaller scale, such as 2 or 3 patients on scene. Whatever unit is assigned as med group by the IC will be the med group supervisor, and all other units assigned to that group will work for that supervisor. So this means that all information that is needed would be reported to that supervisor, and then they would pass the information to the IC. That supervisor would be responsible for making sure that the triage is completed and then assigning units reporting to them to provide care and to assist with sorting patients from triage. If there are specific needs during the triage, then the crews can request them through the supervisor to the IC. But they should not directly address the IC to maintain the integrity of the chain of command. Triage can be assigned to a single responder or to a crew, and they can be made a triage group. This can be done without having to make a med group assignment if the IC wishes. If a triage group is made, there again would be a supervisor of that group, and if any other unit was assigned to triage, they would report to that supervisor. The group supervisor is in charge of reporting the primary triage to the IC once it is completed with the total number of patients and the status of each one. When triage is performed, EMS providers should move quickly in obtaining a total number of patients and how critical those patients are. The IC will need to be patient when waiting for the triage count, but they should also expect that each patient will take no longer than 30 seconds to be triaged with a maximum time of 60 seconds. This gives the IC a time frame reference, and this will help in moving the pace of the call along if needed. Though this is not within the scope of this presentation to go into details of performing a triage, the IC should expect that each provider will only be performing a rapid assessment of each patient and not providing treatments. This information will help the IC understand what the responders are expected to do, and if needed, communicate that to the supervisor of that group. Once triage has been completed, patients will move to a treatment area that is designated by the IC or a supervisor that is in charge of the treatment group. This may be a specific large area similar to a casualty collection point or in the back of any ambulances on scene if there are multiple ambulances, or there may be one ambulance and that may be the collection point. The treatment group supervisor will also dictate what units will treat what patients based on their triage status. With a large enough incident, several ILS units may respond to help shoulder the load of the large amounts of patient, especially if there are several non-critical patients, them yellow or green, that need to be transported. It's up to the treatment group supervisor to assign the most appropriate crew to the most appropriate patient. The tag pictured on this slide is the START triage kit and is used to help crews identify what vital signs, possible contaminants, when treatments were administered, and other important information. We will not go in depth on everything that is on the START triage tag pictures, but responders need to be aware of what it looks like since they may be assigned a supervisor. All of this information helps the IC in managing a treatment group so they can understand what their treatment group supervisor is going through, and then also what the expectation should be for that treatment group supervisor. The IC will not be managing the treatment group specifically or providing any patient care. That will all fall to the treatment group supervisor and that treatment group supervisor's crew or units that are assigned to that treatment group. The last major assignment that's made on MCIs is transport. Though this is the last assignment, it is the most difficult to track. The transport group supervisor will be in charge of tracking the name of each patient, where they were sent, how they got there, what their chief complaint was, and what they were triaged as. On top of each tag is their transportation receipt that needs all this information along with 2 different ambulance receipts. One of the receipts will go with the ambulance to the hospital, while the other will stay with the transport group supervisor for tracking purposes. Again, the scope of this presentation is not to go into detail on what the exact role of each group supervisor is or what that role entails, but it is to make whoever the IC is aware of what to expect from each group, a broad scope of how each group will function on scene, and the assignments that the IC can make. At the bottom of the SNFO worksheet is a box with important things to consider and benchmarks. All of these things will not be needed on every MCI, but this gives you a list of all the resources that may be considered for any MCI. Many of the ideas we have already covered, such as triage, rescue or extrication group, hazmat, and the heavy rescue, are already on this list. There are several more things that can be considered, such as notifying hospitals, having a decon area if it's a hazmat incident, assigning a staging area to a manager so resources can be directed from a predetermined staging location, etc. Benchmarks during an MCI are straightforward when it comes to what is needed. Have all patients been triaged? Were all the patients tagged red transported, tagged yellow transported, and were all the patients on scene transported? Those 4 questions need to be answered yes for the IC to meet all benchmarks for the incident. The role of the IC will vary depending on the incident. As we have learned with vehicle accidents, there's a large difference if there's one patient versus several patients involved. The IC will need to be able to understand what the needs to be accomplished so they know what resources to request. Once the incident is over, the IC can begin to demobilize and de-escalate the incident. As resources are no longer needed, the IC can release them from scene so they can return to service and begin to open up more room on the scene. Vehicle accidents will often take place on major highways or freeways, though it is not the first priority for the IC to consider when managing the incident. As the scene starts to de-escalate, they should consider working with law enforcement for traffic control to allow traffic through if possible. Before terminating command as the IC, that person should use the worksheet to double check if they have missed any resources they may need or benchmarks they did not complete. Once the IC has determined that the level of command and control is not needed, they can terminate command and either release all units if that's possible, or transfer command to any unit on scene and let that unit terminate command once they are ready to leave. Working as the IC on vehicle accidents is labor intensive at the start of the incident and as it unfolds. The person who assumes the role of the incident commander must understand that what resources they can request and what assignments need to be made to manage the incident. Many responders want to continue to assist with tasks throughout the incident when they are the IC. At first, this may be a requirement, but as more units arrive, the IC needs to remove themselves from performing tasks and place themselves where they can manage the incident. The IC may not be the responder providing first line care or the firefighter performing the extrication needed, but their role is vital in the overall management and successful outcome for the incident that they are in charge of.